M-commerce is about creating a seamless and frictionless experience for your customers. We hear from some of the pioneers in this space about how they are finding and closing new customers through mobile. So what do you think the one or two or three impediments here are for us to really embrace this thing called M-commerce or mobile transactions?
Well, I think that it's just a matter of speed at which we're going to adopt it. It's coming.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's any one particular impediment that once we resolve that by itself, everything will roll. And I think that we're getting caught up with the technology. People are getting comfortable with what the services can do, what the consequences are of using the services, and what's really possible. And I think you're going to see us led by the younger generations. You know?
Sure.
I have an 8-year-old daughter and 7-year-old identical twin boys, and from the age of 3, they could pick up a device and intuitively use it. And I think that really also an important part of this has been the improvement in user interfaces, frankly, for the devices. Right? If you think back 5 years ago, you had the nested menus and you had to go through 4 steps to even get to a browser and do everything. And I think that really there's been such a great improvement with making it easier for consumers to engage in m-commerce. And that process is just going to continue. And as it does, you'll see greater adoption.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with that statement that people are getting a little bit more comfortable. I think that we in the mobile industry tend to look at it through that concept that everybody is doing this right now, and there's an accepted reality, which not everybody's doing it, especially not in the developed world, and then there's a rose-colored glasses reality where I wish people would adopt this, and there's a big space in between that's full of turmoil and competition and stress.
Right.
So I look at mobile commerce and think, who's going to win here? Who has an opportunity to extend their business fully into this mobile realm? Credit card companies aren't going to give up, and certainly they're fighting for their lives right now. And the upstarts, guys like Square and even PayPal, are now in there battling it out. What about standards? Because the biggest challenge is that not everybody. I don't carry 3 or 4 wallets. Right. I don't carry 3 or 4 different brands of credit cards. We streamlined it, and I've heard people say, you're going to have 2 digital wallets or 2 mobile wallets, and I think that's crazy. How does this play out? Because this is going to be ugly, I would say, in that mess.
Well, that's right. I mean, standards play a very important role in a number of different ways, and it helps both with consumer confidence, because to the extent that you have certain things done in a certain way, it helps consumers who aren't necessarily technologically savvy to be familiar with the product. It helps from a technological standpoint, because if there's a standard and you know that you develop an application or a platform or something and you at least make it fit within the standard, you can get enough scale to really get funding and make better products. We need to ensure that our efforts in creating standards are set up in a way that facilitates our goals of enabling technology without sort of forcing everything through a preconceived notion of this is what m-commerce is. Because if there's one thing that we should have learned by now, it's that m-commerce won't be tomorrow what we think it will be today.
Right. Yeah, it is. It's not a straight line.
No.
It's not a straight line, but you got to believe that trust comes from companies like Visa and MasterCard, because we've already trusted them, and they've put those security parameters in to ensure our trust is continued. And they're very responsive, and they have a global network of support. And when you use your credit card for something that's an anomaly compared to what your typical patterns are, they'll call you, and that is all part of that trust. And it has to be wrapped up in the mobile space as well. And using a device to buy something or to transact, you will be using it in an anomalous way, some way that you didn't do it. You'll be paying parking meters and pop machines and those kind of things. Like, that's got to be a big picture thing that when you look at it, you think, wow, this is much greater than any of us really know.
It is, and if you look at the way consumers use technology, they're very willing to trust something that's new. I mean, Twitter.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
I'm not giving you my credit card.
That's true, but again, even Amazon, right? Like, if you had described Amazon to someone 15 years ago, they would have said, "Are you insane?" Yeah. And so the key, I think, is really focusing on the consumer. We in this space are technologists. We love technology. Mm-hmm. We get technology. We're likely to be the early adopters. We're likely to be the risk takers. Yeah. We likely understand what some of the real risks are and what they aren't. Yeah. So sometimes we'll get into the engineering habit of creating a great technology and then handing it over to a customer and saying, "Use this, you'll love it." Yeah. And I think that as the industry ages, matures, and we have more players who are focused very intensely on the consumers, how they use the technology, how they interact with it, you will see consumer adoption boom. And it doesn't necessarily matter whether it's an established known player, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, or whether it's someone that we haven't even heard their name yet today. Right. What's going to matter is whether you address consumer needs and you do so in a way that makes someone's life better.
Yeah, frictionless.
Frictionless.
Yeah, we've just concluded we're at the back end of a direct marketing campaign, which is a mixture of email, snail mail, pretty well every conceivable version you can think of. And the reason we did that, because we're doing some price testing, but we're also doing what happens to the traffic on the website in terms of numbers of subscriptions when we are doing a direct mail campaign versus when we're not. So typically, in any given month, we are selling about 100 subscriptions to the whole package via the website, and we sell about another 60 via applications. So people download the free app, then they realise they get a paywall, and then they'll subscribe. When we increase DM activity, we're doing 300 a month online, and we're doing 100 through the app. So which is kind of reflective of the installed base of the two. Yeah. Well, we're finding that everything affects everything else. So years and years ago, Procter & Gamble, I don't think they invented it, an academic invented, but they did a series of linear regression models to figure out what element of their ad campaign was delivering the best buck for their money. And that's the kind of thing we're starting to do. As you pull out some promotional marketing, what does it do to all the others?
Well, I think there's always like, I always try to boil it down to something. Well, it doesn't sound like it, but in my mind I try to think of what are the simple things. What is the carrot? I mean, what's the carrot for me as a consumer? So, some brands, if you think about it, that have a proprietary card, for example. Yep. If you're using their card and then you're using, you're tying that card to whether it's an SMS payment gateway or you're tying it to an application or, a wallet, that you can provide more incentive because as a retailer, you're able to save on those transaction costs, and you can provide more rewards, you can provide more benefit to your customer, and each retailer has to think about that. That's they know their customer and they know what they can offer. So can you offer more of that as an incentive to bring them in there? People outside of the retail space, it's what is the value add for them? So if you think about companies like Google, where they have just mountains of data and they can kind of guess what you're interested in, what you like, and so they can start bringing more recommendations in. That's a value. But I think at each, depending where you are in the value chain, and how much money you're saving or how much money you potentially stand to gain by moving to these things, that's going to be determining what that carrot is and how big that carrot is. But different retailers, I think, can get very creative with this. And it really depends on how much they're willing to allow their marketing teams and some of their business leaders within the organization to test. And I think this is one of the big challenges, is that a lot of decisions in the retail industry are based on lots of research and data, and if we do this, then our incremental sales gain would be X. Well, the challenge is when you're trying to do something new, there's not a whole lot of precedent out there sometimes. There's not a whole lot of data that you can cull, so people are pulling numbers out of the air. And then when they go try these things, those few people who are lucky enough to get to try some of these more experimental things, and they don't meet the numbers that they put in their deck, then people say, oh, that didn't work.
Shut it down.
Yeah, shut it down. And so they kill it before it even has a chance. Whereas, I really admire companies like Coca-Cola, where they actually have big budgets for experimentation. Yeah. And they tell their people, go out there and really work on this. And I think the retail space, there's a few brands that are starting to do this more and more. And any brand that really, I think, is in the retail space that wants to be successful has to set aside some funding for this kind of experimentation, because the reality is, if you're trying to engage your customer with new things, it's going to take a while sometimes to figure out what's going to work, what doesn't work. And yes, there's some value in sometimes waiting and being a fast follower, which is what some brands do. But, you know, are you going to let someone grab all your other customers?
Well, exactly. and there's a flaw in that, because what worked for one company in a certain circumstance is not going to work for your company. It's not cookie cutter right now.
Exactly.
But it leads you to wonder, what are the biggest impediments to engagement? Like the one or two things that consumers that you know are an impediment for consumers to actually become engaged with the retailers.
Well, I think one of the challenges is between the creative, you know, part of the organization, which, you know, the defenders of the brand, if you would, who've been there for a long time, and your kind of user experience and product management teams, which are really trying to think of how do we make a more utilitarian, easier, faster, better experience. And in a lot of retail brands, you have folks who, you know, these guys are great. They've spent years, they've invested big chunks of their lives to rise to the ranks that they're at. And I respect that they come up with some beautiful designs and things which really catch the eye and move you in some way to have a more engaged relationship with the brand, keeping that brand top of mind. Yep. But these things don't always apply when you're talking about making something easy to use. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges in the retail space, is that these folks here who are on the user experience side and the product management side, they're kind of treated like the geeks in the corner. You know, they're sort of like they're treated like the developers. Oh, well, you know, we want to do this iPhone app and it's going to be pretty like this. So you guys figure out how to make it, okay? And then, you know, along the way, the UX user experience guys and the product managers come back and they say, hey, you know, here's our recommendation. You know, this would make this much easier to use. It gets the customer through the checkout process faster, or it presents products in a more meaningful and interesting way to the customer. Yeah. And then there's like, well, that's not pretty. That's not pretty enough for our brand. So, so you'll see, like, you know, there needs to be a cultural shift within the organizations. There needs to be some kind of evolution in the culture of an organization where they start to accept and respect that there are people out there who've been in the digital space and they know what they're talking about. Or, you know, hey, we're going to experiment. We're going into a new place that we don't know before. So, you know, sometimes we've got to lean up a little bit and be a little more creative with what we're letting our people do with the brand.
Yes, actually, we've just initiated a digital commerce committee, and we're looking at all sorts of commerce activity, transactions, data points, how we can ultimately target the masses. So we want to know what's relevant to you as a season ticket member, as a casual fan. Is this important to you? If it isn't, what is, and how can we cater to you so that your experience is unprecedented when you come to our stadium?